The galaxy has many maps, carefully drawn with precision, showing the borders of empires, the trade routes of merchants, and the safe lanes patrolled by fleets. Yet if one looks closely, there is a vast blank stretch where no star charts dare to tread. Entire clusters remain unmarked, systems left without labels, and travelers are warned not to stray too close. That blank place, unspoken in council halls and whispered about in darkened mess rooms, is where humanity resides. And the chilling part is not just the absence of ink on the maps, but the reason why no one dares to chart it. The story begins with an outsider's curiosity, a small alien vessel drifting along the edge of this forbidden space. Its crew had studied maps for decades and found the absence of detail too strange to ignore. After all, maps were power, and in a galaxy ruled by knowledge, blind spots were dangerous. Why would an entire stretch of inhabited territory be left blank? What force could compel entire empires to erase or ignore it? No law was ever passed to forbid charting it, yet the silence was heavier than any decree. Rumors traveled faster than ships. Some claimed that human space was cursed, that those who entered it vanished without a trace. Others swore that strange signals bled out from the void. Fragmented words in human tongues, always promising, always warning. But the most unsettling stories came from the few survivors who returned. Their accounts were inconsistent, filled with fear and disbelief, yet all carried the same tone. They had seen something that should not exist, something that defied every law of the universe. The galaxy itself seemed to bend around this mystery. Traders who dealt with humans rarely admitted where they had gone, and even the bravest captains avoided carrying human coordinates in their nav systems. It was safer to erase the routes after every trip. Safer to pretend the journeys never happened. The silence was a shield, protecting them from questions they didn't want to answer. Yet it also created the legend. Why was human space unmappable? What truth could be so terrifying that even hardened warlords chose ignorance? For humanity, the absence went unnoticed. Humans were used to being underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside by older species who believed their own civilizations had perfected the galaxy. But what the others never understood was that humanity thrived in being overlooked. It gave them time to build, time to learn, and time to prepare. Hidden behind the blank ink of star charts, humanity grew stronger, adapting in ways no one else dared. The story follows one human observer stationed near the frontier, a quiet post that overlooked the alien patrols that never dared to cross the border. He knew the silence better than anyone. From his outpost, he could see how foreign vessels halted at the invisible line, how their scanners flickered with static, and how even automated probes simply failed when directed toward human space. He kept records, though he rarely shared them. For even among his own kind, some truths were better left unspoken. One evening, his instruments caught something unusual, a distress beacon drifting from the edge. It was alien, weak, almost swallowed by static, but unmistakable. Against orders, he locked onto the signal and pulled it closer. The object was a life pod, its hull scorched, its markings from a species that had sworn never to approach human stars again. Inside lay a lone survivor, trembling, eyes wide with terror. The alien spoke in broken words, begging not for rescue but for silence. "Erase this. Do not let them know I returned." His voice shook with fear, as though speaking the truth. Would summon something even in the safety of orbit. The human tried to calm him, but the survivor only repeated a single phrase, again and again, until his breath failed. "The maps lie for a reason." That phrase became an obsession. Why did the maps lie? What was hidden behind the veil of fear? The human officer dug into old reports, scattered transmissions, half-erased logs smuggled through black markets. The deeper he searched, the clearer the picture became. There was a pattern in the disappearances, a rhythm to the silence, as if something vast and ancient pulsed beneath the surface of human space, not a threat to humans themselves, but to everyone else who dared to step inside. Still, knowledge alone was dangerous. Entire fleets had tried to force their way in, convinced that whatever secret humanity kept must be a weapon. None had returned. Those empires erased their failures, blaming navigational errors or pirate ambushes. But the humans knew. They watched the borders, keeping their silence, letting the galaxy believe whatever rumors it preferred. The officer realized then that the truth was not just chilling, it was intentional. The maps did not refuse to mark human space. The galaxy refused. Entire civilizations, consciously or not, agreed to leave the region blank. Fear had bound them together, stronger than treaties, stronger than armies, and humanity had never corrected them. That revelation weighed heavily on him. He wanted to tell someone, to shout the truth across the stars. But every time he tried, he remembered the alien's dying eyes, the terror in his final words, and the silence of the maps stretched out before him, as vast as the void. One night, his station's alarm screamed. A new vessel had crossed the line. It was not alien. It was human. But unlike any design he had seen before. Its hull was jagged, bristling with strange energy fields, as though it had been built to resist forces no outsider could comprehend. The ship did not hail him. It did not broadcast identity codes. It simply moved deeper into the blank region, into the place no maps dared show. He stood frozen, watching it disappear, and in that moment he realized the chilling revelation that every empire feared, the truth that no one would admit aloud. The maps were not blank because of what humanity wanted to hide from the galaxy. They were blank because of what the galaxy could not bear to face. The officer leaned forward, staring at the empty screen where the ship had vanished. His hand hovered over the comm switch, torn between duty and dread. If he reported what he had seen, the galaxy might finally learn the truth. But if he stayed silent, he might live to see the day when silence was no longer enough. The stars beyond human space flickered like watching eyes, as if waiting for his choice. And then, with a slow breath, he realized that something was already watching him back. The officer sat in silence long after the strange human vessel had vanished into the black. His console still hummed with faint static from the scanners, but the screen was empty. He could not shake the feeling that something had passed before his eyes that was not meant to be seen. The silence of the border pressed harder on him than ever before, and for the first time he wondered if the blank on the map was not a shield for humanity, but a warning to everyone else. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling of his station, recalling the alien survivor's words. The maps lie for a reason. That sentence would not leave him. He tried to sleep that night, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the life pod drifting, the survivor's face pale with terror. His mind drifted back to the first time he had been posted to this frontier, fresh out of training, when the mystery of uncharted space had felt almost exciting. Back then, he had imagined he might stumble upon hidden colonies or forgotten technology. Now, years later, he realized the truth was darker, too dark for the galaxy to name. In the weeks that followed, he began to search quietly through restricted archives. He pulled old reports, fragments of intercepted transmissions, and logs from ships that had brushed too close to the border. Patterns began to emerge, though always incomplete. There were notes about alien scout ships entering human space and never returning. Whole expeditions launched with confidence, only to vanish without a trace. Some of the few survivors claimed they had seen impossible things, stars shifting, distances warping, voices speaking in their minds. Others described entire fleets turning against themselves, ships firing on their allies without reason, as if driven mad by unseen forces. He found a particularly old report buried in a forgotten database, written centuries ago, long before humanity had expanded to its current borders. It described a council debate between alien species on whether to confront humanity early, before they could rise too far. The debate ended not with war, but with silence. A fleet sent to measure humanity's true strength disappeared. The survivors, those few who stumbled back, could not explain what had happened. They spoke of vast shadows moving between the stars, of structures too large to be natural, and of a sense that space itself had turned against them. After that, the maps began to change. One by one, empires erased human space from their charts, until the practice became universal. No decree was ever issued, but the silence spread like infection. The officer felt a chill as he pieced the story together. This was no simple fear of war or weapons. The galaxy had faced warlords and doomsday devices before. This was different. This was a silence that suggested something no one wanted to remember. Humanity's territory was not just a blank. It was a scar the galaxy refused to touch. And yet, within human space, life seemed ordinary. Colonies thrived, ships traded, and people lived their lives without fear. Outsiders never saw the quiet strength hidden beneath that normal surface. The B officer had been raised in those colonies. He had eaten in their kitchens, laughed in their halls, and watched their children play beneath strange suns. There was nothing unnatural about them, nothing monstrous. And yet the rest of the galaxy recoiled from them as if they carried some ancient curse. One evening, he opened a secure channel to an old friend deep within the human fleet. The friend, a captain now, laughed when asked why the map stayed blank. "You've been on the frontier too long," the captain said, but the laughter didn't sound genuine. "The galaxy doesn't like what it doesn't understand. They fear us. That's enough reason." The officer pushed, asking about the lost fleets, the survivors' stories, the strange human vessel he had seen. But the captain's voice grew cold. "Forget what you think you saw. Some things aren't meant to be chased. Stay alive. That's my advice." Then the channel went dead. The officer stared at the silent console, feeling more alone than ever. Even his own kind refused to speak. Was it fear, or was it something deeper, an understanding that humanity's truth could never be safely explained? He thought back to the ship he had seen, the one built with strange energy fields, and wondered if humanity was building something to contain, or something to unleash. The days blurred into one another, the stars outside his station unchanged. But he could not shake the sense of being watched. It was subtle at first, slight delays in his sensor readings, faint static when he tried to record his logs, shadows in the corners of his vision. He checked the systems again and again, but nothing was broken. The station was intact, and yet the silence felt heavier now, as if his questions had stirred something awake. He began to notice patterns in the signals leaking from human space. They were faint, irregular bursts, almost like echoes. At first, he thought they were random noise, but when he compared them to older records, he realized they repeated over time. Not words, not coordinates, but a rhythm, a pulse, almost like a heartbeat, echoing across the void. He wondered if anyone else had ever seen it. Perhaps they had, and erased it. Perhaps this was the reason maps went blank, not because of borders, but because of this pulse that defied understanding. One night, he followed the rhythm deeper, adjusting his sensors to isolate it. For a moment, the silence broke. A voice, not human, not alien, but something in between, whispered across the channel. He could not understand the words, yet he felt them settle deep inside, heavy and cold. The voice faded as quickly as it came, leaving him breathless, his console blank once more. He sat there for hours, staring into the void, asking himself the same question again and again. What had humanity hidden, and why did the galaxy fear it so much? He thought of the blank maps, the vanished fleets, the survivors' final words, and the ship built to sail deeper into silence. Piece by piece, the picture grew darker, until he realized the truth might not just be about humanity at all. Perhaps the galaxy did not refuse to map human space because of humans themselves. Perhaps it was because of what lay beneath, something humans had discovered, or awakened, and learned to live beside, something the rest of the galaxy could not face. He leaned closer to the viewport, watching the black stretch of stars, and for the first time he felt the pull of the unknown. His orders were to watch and report, but every part of him wanted to cross that invisible line, to see with his own eyes what no map dared to show. He imagined his ship's engines firing, carrying him into the silence. He imagined the pulse growing louder, the whispers clearer. He imagined finding the truth, even if it destroyed him. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He pressed his hand against the cold glass of the viewport, as if touching the emptiness would answer him. And then, just as his resolve began to harden, his sensors flared. Another signal, another vessel. This one was not human. It was alien, but unlike the others, it had crossed the line. The officer's breath caught. Someone else had dared to enter the blank, and this time, he was not just a watcher. He was the only witness. The stars outside seemed to hold their breath as he turned his gaze to the console, waiting for what would happen next. The officer's hands hovered over the controls, uncertain, whether to hail the alien ship or simply watch in silence. His heart pounded as the vessel drifted farther into the unmarked region, its engines burning with steady light. Whoever they were, they had crossed the line no other dared to approach. He magnified the view and studied the craft. It bore the markings of a minor trading guild, not a warship. That made it even stranger. Why would merchants risk entering the most feared blank on every map? Unless, of course, they were desperate or perhaps searching for something too valuable to ignore. He activated his long-range scanners, but the readings flickered with static, just as they always did near human borders. Still, he caught brief glimpses of activity inside the alien ship, crew moving about, signals bouncing erratically, as if the very space around them refused to carry sound clearly. Then something strange happened. The vessel's beacon cut out. One moment it pulsed strong and clear, the next it was gone. Not destroyed, not fading into distance, just silenced as though swallowed whole. The ship itself remained visible, but its presence on every instrument blinked away. The officer leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass of the viewport. To the naked eye, the alien ship was still there, but the systems that tracked mass, power, and energy all claimed it no longer existed. It was like watching a ghost. His skin prickled as he imagined what it must feel like for those inside, realizing their existence had been erased from detection, their voices cut from the stars. He began recording everything, desperate to have proof. Yet deep down, he knew this was the kind of evidence that never survived. Reports would be classified, buried, or accidentally lost, just like all the others before. But he could not stop himself. He needed the truth, even if it consumed him. Meanwhile, he began to think of the humans inside the blank space, the ones living ordinary lives. Did they know the effect their region had on outsiders? Were they aware of the strange distortions, the vanishing signals, the ships that disappeared without a trace? Or had they grown so accustomed to it that it no longer seemed unusual? The officer wondered if humanity had chosen silence not to protect themselves, but to protect the galaxy from knowing too much. As he wrestled with these thoughts, the alien vessel shuddered. A faint ripple passed across its hull, as though invisible. Waves were colliding with it. Lights flickered, engines flared and dimmed. Then, without warning, one of its shuttles detached and sped toward the officer's station. His eyes widened. Had they detected him, even while cut off from sensors? Were they reaching for help, or were they fleeing from something inside their own ship? He powered up docking protocols, his mind racing. The shuttle was small, battered, its shields flickering. It docked with an uneven clang, scraping metal against his station's outer ring. He rushed to the airlock, weapon at his side, though he had no desire to use it. The doors hissed open, releasing a blast of cold air. Inside, two figures stumbled forward, aliens, gaunt and trembling, eyes wide with terror. They collapsed, too, the floor clutching at him as though he were their only hope. "Shut it out!" one gasped, voice breaking. "Shut it out before it follows!" The other said nothing, only stared at the ceiling as if expecting something to descend. The officer dragged them inside, sealing the hatch behind him. His heart raced as he tried to steady them, offering water, forcing himself to ask what they had seen. Their words spilled out in fragments, shadows moving in the corridors, voices whispering in their heads, not in any language they knew, but pressing meaning directly into thought. The sensation that the ship itself was no longer their own, that something else had taken hold of it. They had launched the shuttle because they no longer trusted their vessel, convinced it was no longer theirs to control. The officer's blood ran cold. He had heard echoes of these stories before, tucked into reports no one believed. But seeing, the fear in their faces made it real. He checked the viewport again. The alien ship still drifted silently in space, engines dark now, as if it too had lost its will. He locked the station systems, strengthening the shields, though he doubted they would matter if whatever haunted the ship chose to cross. His. Two guests sat shivering, muttering prayers in a language he only half understood. Their terror was contagious, filling the station with a heavy tension. While they rested, the officer returned to his console and searched through his growing collection of fragments, the pattern of disappearances, the pulse from human space, the whispered voices. It all connected, though he could not yet see how. Perhaps humanity had learned to live with these forces, to shield themselves from what drove others mad. That would explain why only outsiders suffered. But then why build ships with strange defenses? Why the silence in every official record? He wondered what his own people would say if they knew he had taken survivors aboard, if they knew he was digging into forbidden archives. Would they see him as reckless, or as someone getting too close to the truth? He thought again of his captain friend who had warned him to stop. Perhaps the silence wasn't only for the galaxy's sake. Perhaps even humanity feared what might happen if one of their own began asking too many questions. Days passed with the survivors aboard, though they grew no calmer. They refused to return to their ship, refused even to look at it through the viewport. One of them muttered constantly, describing things he should not have been able to see, vast structures stretching between stars, dark shapes blotting out light, and eyes, endless eyes, watching from the void. The other sat in silence, staring at his hands as though afraid of what they might do without his control. Then the pulse returned. The officer felt it before he saw it, a vibration deep in his chest, like a heartbeat not his own. His console lit up with irregular bursts of static, patterns forming and vanishing. The two survivors cried out, clutching their heads. The station shook, not from impact, but from something deeper, as though reality itself had trembled. He fought to keep the system stable, alarms blaring around him, and then, through the static, a message formed. Not in any language he knew, but clear nonetheless. A warning: do not follow. The words burned in his mind, more felt than heard. The survivors screamed, one collapsing unconscious, the other clawing. at the air as if trying to escape an invisible grip. The officer shut down his receivers, but the words lingered, echoing in his head long after the consoles went dark. He stood trembling, staring out at the drifting alien ship. The warning had been clear, but the mystery was greater than ever. What was humanity living beside? Why were they spared when others were consumed? And most importantly, what would happen if the galaxy ever refused to accept silence and tried to uncover the truth? The stars outside pulsed faintly as though answering his thoughts. He pressed his hand against the glass again, and in the reflection he thought he saw eyes, just for a moment, watching him from the dark. The officer had stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the pulse echoing through his chest, that strange heartbeat that did not belong to him. The two alien survivors aboard his station had only worsened his unease. One lay silent most of the time, waking only to whisper about shadows moving in the corners of his sight. The other muttered constantly, drawing shapes across the walls. With trembling fingers, circles within circles, lines that spiraled into patterns too precise to be random. The officer erased them each day, but every night the alien scrawled them again, as if compelled. The drifting alien ship remained outside, dark and lifeless, yet still there. Its presence felt wrong, as though space itself had been bent to keep it visible. He had tried sending probes, but they never reached the hull. They would vanish mid-flight, their signals cut off, leaving only static. The survivors begged him not to try again. "It wants you to look," one said, his eyes bloodshot. "That's how it begins. Don't look too closely." But the officer could not stop himself. The galaxy had avoided this question for centuries, and now it was pressing itself against his station walls. He had spent his career guarding silence, and suddenly silence was no longer enough. If he didn't search for answers, then the answers might come for him anyway. He combed through the archives again, finding scraps that others had missed. Old distress calls carried in static, last words from ships that never returned. Some described seeing human vessels at impossible speeds, appearing where no drive should allow. Others spoke of stars rearranging themselves, constellations twisting, into new forms as if the universe itself were being rewritten. And always, the reports ended the same way. Silence. No transmission ever lasted long. No explanation was ever given. The officer began to think of human colonies differently. He imagined families living under skies that shifted without warning, planets circling stars that did not stay in place. How had humanity endured such strangeness without losing their minds? How had they built trade, fleets, cities, while surrounded by forces that drove outsiders to madness? The thought unsettled him more than the darkness outside. Perhaps humans had not just adapted, they had become part of it. The survivors grew worse as the days passed. The one who muttered constantly began speaking words in the officer's own language, though he swore he had never taught him. The phrases were broken, jagged, but they carried meaning. "They walk with it," he whispered, staring through the viewport. "Humans. They walk with it." When pressed to explain, he only laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty station halls. The officer started to see the shapes too. Not clearly, not like the drawings, but in the way shadows bent in the corners of his vision. He told himself it was lack of sleep, stress, the isolation of the frontier. But deep down, he knew it was something else. The closer he looked at the alien ship, the stronger the distortions grew. His instruments were no longer trustworthy. Numbers fluctuated, coordinates twisted, time itself seemed to stutter. One night, the pulse grew stronger. The entire station shuddered as though gripped by invisible hands. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and the survivors screamed in unison, their voices blending with a strange low hum that filled the air. The officer clutched the console, fighting to stabilize the systems, but the screens flooded with impossible readings. distances collapsing, gravity spiking, signals bending back on themselves. In the middle of the chaos, a shape appeared on the main display. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a planet. It was something vast, stretching across the stars like a shadow, a presence so large it could not be measured, and then it was gone, leaving only static. The officer sat frozen, sweat dripping down his back. He replayed the data, but the recording was blank. No trace of the shape remained. But he had seen it. The survivors had seen it too. Their eyes were wide, their voices trembling as they whispered, "It noticed us." He sent a secure message to Fleet Command, desperate to report what he had witnessed. But the transmission failed, each attempt swallowed by silence before leaving the station. No signal would pass. He was cut off, trapped in the dark with something, watching from beyond the stars. The days stretched longer, though he could no longer trust the clocks. Time seemed to bend, minutes feeling like hours, hours collapsing into moments. He could not tell if the sun beyond his viewport rose and set, as it should, or if the stars rearranged themselves while he blinked. The survivors had stopped eating. They sat in silence, their bodies trembling, their eyes fixed on something he could not see. Then the human vessel returned. The same jagged ship he had glimpsed weeks before, bristling with strange energy fields. It appeared without warning, sliding into view as though it had been waiting in the shadows all along. His scanners flickered, struggling to process its outline. For a brief moment he thought he saw more than one ship, copies layered on top of each other, overlapping in impossible ways, before merging back into a single form. The ship did not hail him. It moved past his station, heading directly toward the alien vessel. For the first time since the survivors had arrived, their fear shifted. They no longer trembled at the drifting ship outside. They trembled at the human vessel. "They shouldn't be here," one whispered, his voice breaking. "They walk with it. They bring it." The officer's throat tightened. If humanity had built ships like this, designed to move within the silence, then what did it mean? Were they allies of the thing that haunted the void, or were they captives themselves? He pressed his face against the viewport, watching as the human ship drew alongside the derelict alien vessel. Lights flickered across its hull, patterns like the ones the survivor had drawn on his walls. Circles within circles, spirals bending into themselves, and then, with a single burst of light, the alien vessel vanished. Not destroyed. Simply gone. The human ship pulsed once, then turned away, heading deeper into the blank. The officer staggered back from the viewport, his mind racing. The survivors wailed, collapsing to the floor, clutching their heads as though the very sight had broken them. He didn't know what he had just witnessed. Rescue, erasure, assimilation. All he knew was that the human ship had acted with purpose, with control and with knowledge of forces the rest of the galaxy feared to name. He returned to the console, desperate to record everything, but his systems were failing. Every attempt to store data ended in corrupted files. Every log he tried to write twisted into symbols he didn't understand. He realized then that the silence around human space wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. The galaxy could not map what refused to be mapped. It could not record what refused to be recorded. The pulse returned, stronger than ever, rattling the station. The officer fell to his knees, clutching his chest as though the beat would tear him apart. The survivors screamed again, their voices merging with the hum until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. The lights dimmed, shadows thickening, shapes forming just beyond the edge of sight. He crawled to the viewport, dragging himself upright to look out at the stars. They were wrong again, twisting, shifting, arranging themselves into patterns he couldn't comprehend. And in the center of it all, the human ship hung silent, waiting as if daring him to follow. His breath came ragged, his heart pounding in time with the pulse. He realized he was standing at the edge of something vast, something the galaxy had tried to bury for centuries. The maps were blank because the truth could not be spoken. Humanity had stepped into a darkness older than the stars, and somehow, impossibly, they had learned to walk within it. The officer pressed his hand against the glass, his reflection staring back with hollow eyes. Behind him, the survivors wailed. Outside, the human ship waited. And in that moment, with the pulse pounding through his bones, he knew the climax was close. The silence could not hold forever. Something was coming, and he was trapped at the center of it. The officer stood frozen at the viewport, the pulse hammering through his chest so hard he thought his ribs might break. Outside, the jagged human ship lingered in the darkness, unmoving, yet somehow alive, as though waiting for him to acknowledge it. The survivors behind him whimpered and clutched their heads, muttering words he could barely understand. He wanted to look away, but the ship held him. It was not just an object, it was a message. Humanity was not merely surviving inside the blank space. They were changing, adapting, and perhaps becoming something the galaxy had never faced before. Then, without warning, his console flared to life. A transmission had broken through the static, piercing the silence that had choked his systems for weeks. The voice was human, calm, deliberate, and impossibly close. "Observer," it said, addressing him directly, "you are not authorized to witness this. Power down your station and wait for recall." The words echoed in his mind as much as through the speakers. He stumbled back, shaking his head. They knew him. They knew his post, his purpose, even his thoughts. He tried to respond, but his throat tightened. When he reached for the controls, his hands trembled. The survivors screamed louder, as if the voice itself had cut them open. One collapsed unconscious, the other rocking back and forth, chanting the same broken phrase, "They walk with it! They walk with it!" The officer forced himself to steady his voice and opened a channel. "Who are you?" he asked, his words cracking. "What happened to the alien ship? Why are the maps blank?" Silence followed, heavy and endless, until the voice returned, sharper this time. "Do not follow. Do not seek. This space is not yours to map. Leave it or be taken by it." Before he could argue, the human vessel moved again, sliding deeper into the void. As it did, the stars themselves seemed to bend, warping in its wake, patterns rearranging into spirals that reminded him of the alien scribbles on his walls. The pulse grew louder, syncing with his heartbeat, making it impossible to tell where his body ended and the void began. And then the second twist revealed itself. His station, his fragile outpost clinging to the edge of human space, shifted. Not in orbit, not in position, but in reality. The stars beyond his viewport were no longer the same. Entire constellations had vanished, replaced by ones he had never seen before. His navigation system spun wildly, unable to find reference points. It was as if his entire station had been pulled inside the blank. Panic surged through him. He checked every system, desperate for coordinates, but none matched. Known space. He was no longer at the border. He was inside. The survivors wailed, their fear boiling over into hysterical sobs. One pounded on the walls with trembling fists, shouting for release. The other simply stared at the officer with hollow eyes, whispering, "Now you see." The officer's mind reeled. He had not crossed the line. He had not moved his station. And yet the blank had swallowed him whole. It wasn't just a place. It was a force, pulling in anything that lingered too close for too long. The galaxy had not erased humanity's space from their maps by choice. It was erased because the blank refused to be charted. It shifted, it devoured, it rearranged, making every attempt to define it meaningless. But that realization carried an even darker weight. If humanity lived here, then they had adapted to this shifting void. They had built ships capable of moving through it, of commanding it. Perhaps they were not just walking with it, they were shaping it. The thought made his stomach twist. Was humanity protecting the galaxy by keeping silent, or were they hiding what they had become? His sensors flickered again, showing the jagged human vessel now much closer than before. Its hull pulsed with strange energy, spirals of light running across its surface like veins. The officer felt the rhythm in his bones, like his body was being pulled into alignment with the ship's heartbeat. He tried to shut down the feed, but his hands no longer responded as he wished. It was as if the station itself was under another's control. A new transmission came through, but this time it wasn't calm. It was urgent, commanding. Do not resist. You've been brought inside because you asked too much. Your choice is simple. Stay silent and live, or speak and vanish. The words struck him harder than any weapon. His throat tightened as he realized what that meant. The galaxy's silence wasn't born of fear alone. It was enforced. Anyone who tried to reveal the truth was pulled into the blank, erased as if they had never existed. The survivors cried out in unison as though they had been waiting for this moment. One pressed his hands against the glass viewport, screaming at the human ship, calling it a thief, a deceiver, a jailer. The other simply began laughing, broken and hollow, muttering about how the officer had finally joined them. Their words, tangled in his mind, feeding his terror. He wanted to deny it, to believe that his kind still walked free of this shadow, but he could no longer ignore what he had seen. Humanity was not just living in the blank, they were its keepers. The station shuddered again, and the officer's vision swam. For a moment, he thought he saw figures moving in the corners of the room, shapes that bent light, forms too tall and thin to be human, but standing where no one should be. He blinked, and they were gone. But the survivors screamed as if they still saw them. The hum in the walls grew louder, no longer a background vibration, but a voice pressing into his mind. Do not follow. Do not map. Do not speak. He staggered to the console, forcing his hands to obey, trying to record what was happening. But every word he typed dissolved into spirals and circles, symbols repeating endlessly. He realized then that this was why no record ever survived. The blank didn't just consume ships, it consumed truth. Yet, even in his fear, he felt something burning inside him. Defiance. He had been sent here to observe, to protect the galaxy's borders. And now, standing at the edge of humanity's deepest secret, he understood that silence was a cage. If humanity had chosen to walk with something beyond comprehension, then the galaxy had a right to know. Even if it meant being erased, he could not let the silence win. He tried one last, desperate act. He routed power into the emergency beacon, a primitive transmitter unconnected to his station's corrupted systems. It wasn't much, but it was. Old technology, simple, analog, harder for whatever haunted this space to distort. He keyed in a short message. Human space is not empty. The maps lie for a reason. We are inside something alive. He pressed send, and the beacon flared. For a brief moment, he felt hope. But then, the station went dark. Every light, every hum, every system fell silent. The survivors screamed one final time, their voices cut short. The viewport filled with shadow, pressing against the glass like a tide of darkness. The officer stood alone in the black, the pulse beating louder than ever, shaking the very air. Outside, the human ship hovered, its lights burning brighter, spirals stretching outward as if preparing to engulf him. His beacon might have escaped, or it might have been swallowed. He would never know. But in that moment, as the shadow pressed closer and the survivors vanished into silence, he understood the truth. The galaxy did not refuse to map human space because of ignorance or superstition. They refused because the act of mapping it invited the blank to notice you. Humanity had been living in that gaze for centuries, adapting, changing, perhaps even merging with it. And now, by seeking too deeply, he had been noticed too. The pulse reached a fever pitch, rattling his bones, drowning out his thoughts. The station groaned as the darkness pressed in. He braced himself against the console, heart pounding, mind screaming. The climax was near, and whatever came next would either shatter him or reveal the final secret humanity had been hiding all along. The station groaned under the crushing weight of the darkness, as if the void itself had wrapped around it like a fist. The officer gripped the console until his knuckles burned, the pulse thundering through his body so fiercely it felt like his own heart had been replaced by something older, something vast. The jagged human ship outside burned brighter now, spirals of light crawling across its hull, shifting and twisting like living veins. He realized it was not just traveling through the blank, it was commanding it. The ship's presence bent, the void pulling it into shape. Humanity had not just learned to survive here, they had learned to bend the rules of the unknown. The survivors were gone. He didn't know when their screams had ended. One moment they had been clutching their heads, voices breaking with terror, and the next, there was only silence. He glanced toward the corner where they had huddled, but nothing remained. No bodies, no trace, only empty air where their forms had been. His throat tightened as dread coiled inside him. The blank didn't kill. It erased. A new sound filled the air, low and steady, different from the pulse. Words began to form in his mind, not through speakers or consoles, but as if someone was whispering directly into his thoughts. You were told not to follow. You were told not to speak. His hands trembled as he forced himself to respond, his voice breaking against the silence. Why? Why hide it? Why keep the galaxy blind? The voice inside him deepened, carrying weight that pressed against every nerve. Because they cannot face what walks beside you. Humanity walks with it. Humanity is it. The words made no sense, and yet every part of him felt the truth in them. Humans had not stumbled into the blank. They had been chosen, or had chosen themselves. While other species vanished when touched by this force, humanity endured, shaping the void as it shaped them. That was why the maps were blank. Not because the galaxy feared humanity, but because humanity had become something the galaxy refused to admit existed. The jagged ship outside turned toward his station. A beam of spiraling light lanced out, striking his hull, and suddenly every screen burst alive with images. He saw worlds across human space, ordinary lives continuing under strange skies. Colonies farming, children laughing, fleets patrolling, but behind them, always, the faint shimmer of something vast and hidden, curling through their stars like an unseen tide. Humanity lived with it daily, and no one outside was ever allowed to see. His knees weakened as the images shifted. He saw fleets of alien empires burning, ships tearing themselves apart without a single human weapon fired. He saw probes vanish into black, their data erased. He saw the galaxy's silence, its choice to let the blank remain unmapped because to name it was to invite it closer. Humanity had been the buffer, the keeper of something older than civilizations, and the others had quietly allowed it. That was the bargain. The officer's vision blurred as the whisper returned. Now you have seen. You must choose. Be erased or remain silent. His body shook, torn between fear and defiance. He thought of the beacon he had sent, that desperate analog burst carrying his warning beyond the reach of corruption. Maybe it had escaped. Maybe someone would hear it. He clung to that hope, even as the void pressed tighter. But then came the twist he did not expect. The whisper changed, no longer heavy and alien, but startlingly familiar. A human voice, clear, strong, steady. "You're one of us," it said. He froze. The tone was not threatening, but calm, almost reassuring. You've lived your life in silence, watching, guarding. Now you know the truth. Humanity walks with what others cannot face. That's why the maps are blank. Not to hide from them, but to protect them. The officer's breath caught. Protect? You erase them. You take them. His voice cracked with rage. Those survivors, they're gone. The fleet's vanished. That's not protection. That's silence through fear. The voice grew softer, almost sorrowful. Would you rather the galaxy see? Would you rather they come in endless waves, seeking to fight what cannot be fought? They would all burn. Their empires would fall. Their stars would twist. Silence is mercy. His hands shook against the console. For the first time, he understood the weight of the choice. Humanity had accepted this burden, carrying the blank on their shoulders so others could live in ignorance. It was monstrous, yes, but it was also survival. The galaxy had chosen not to map them because deep down, every empire already knew. They simply lacked the courage to admit it. The spirals of light around the human ship flared again, pressing his station deeper into the void. His consoles cracked, sparks flying, as reality itself seemed to fold. He felt his body shaking apart, his mind splitting under the weight of what pressed into it. And yet, through it all, the human voice held steady. You have one last choice. Join us and carry the silence with us. Or resist and be erased. The officer closed his eyes. He thought of the beacon, the small burst of defiance he had launched before the void consumed his systems. If it reached anyone, the silence would already be broken. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the truth would spread. The galaxy would know that the maps lied. They would know humanity walked with something beyond understanding. He opened his eyes and whispered, I refuse. The pulse slammed into him, blinding and deafening. His body convulsed as the station tore apart around him, panels ripping free, walls dissolving into black. The jagged ship filled his viewport, its spirals wrapping tighter, drawing him into its light. For an instant, he thought he was gone. Erased like the survivors, like the fleets before him. But then came the twist. He was not gone. He was elsewhere. The darkness fell away, and he stood, though he could not feel his legs, on a vast plain of stars. Towers of spirals rose around him, stretching into infinity, alive with motion. Figures stood nearby, human figures, hundreds, thousands, each with eyes that shimmered with the same spirals of light. They turned toward him, silent, watching, as if waiting for him to join their ranks. The voice returned, but now it was many voices blended together. This is the truth of the blank. This is humanity's burden. You are not erased. You are part of it now. His mind reeled, but even as terror flooded him, a sliver of realization cut through. If he was here, then so were the others. The fleets, the survivors, everyone taken. They had not been destroyed. They had been absorbed, bound, into the blank, their voices woven into its silence. Humanity had not merely survived the void. They had become its anchor, shaping it, feeding it, carrying it forward. The officer screamed, but no sound left his mouth. The spirals closed around him, pressing their patterns into his skin, his bones, his thoughts. He felt his individuality, slipping, replaced by something vast and endless. The blank was not a place. It was a chorus, a living silence. And now, he was part of it. Far away, beyond the reach of the blank, a single analog beacon drifted through open space. It carried a broken message, a desperate warning. Human space is not empty. The maps lie for a reason. We are inside something alive. Somewhere, someone would hear it. Somewhere the silence would crack, and as the officer's final thoughts dissolved into the chorus of spirals, he felt one last flicker of defiance. Maybe he had been consumed. Maybe he had joined the silence. But his warning was out there, waiting. The galaxy would know. And when they did, when the silence finally shattered, humanity would no longer walk with the void in secret. They would walk with it in the open, and the galaxy would have to face what it had refused to map. The spirals closed, the pulse thundered, and the officer vanished into the silence, leaving only a whisper that echoed across the stars. The maps lie for a reason. The beacon drifted in silence for days, then weeks, then longer. It was small, fragile, carrying only a burst of words etched into simple code. Yet unlike the advanced signals that had always vanished into static, this crude, analog message moved untouched across the stars. It passed through territories where ships had been erased, across borders where empires feared to look, until finally it reached a receiver far from the blank. The galaxy had chosen silence for centuries, but silence cannot last forever. The truth had been carried out. When the message was decoded, it caused confusion at first. The words were broken, uneven, written with desperation. Human space is not empty. The maps lie for a reason. We are inside something alive. Most dismissed it as a hoax, the kind of strange broadcast that drifts in from lost probes or broken beacons. But others read it with unease. They remembered the fleets that had vanished, the maps that had stayed blank for too long, the stories whispered by captains who swore never to sail near human borders again. The beacon gave weight to those whispers, turning rumors into something sharper. In hidden council halls, empires argued. Some wanted to bury the signal, to treat it as noise and maintain the silence that had kept them safe. Others demanded answers. If humanity truly walked with something alive in the blank, then the galaxy had a right to know. For the first time, in generations, the silence began to crack. Deep inside the blank, the officer was no longer himself, yet fragments of who he had been still clung to him like echoes. He saw endless spirals stretching through the void, alive with motion. He felt the chorus of voices, countless minds woven together into a single silence. Humanity stood among them, not enslaved, not broken, but joined. They had chosen long ago to merge with the thing that had erased all others, not as prey, but as partners. The blank was alive, yes, but it was also a mirror. It twisted whatever entered, reshaping it. Humanity, stubborn and defiant, had not been consumed. They had shaped the blank back. The officer's thoughts flickered between despair and awe. He had fought to resist, and still he had been taken. But as he drifted in the chorus, he understood more. The survivors, the fleets, the vanished, they had not been destroyed. They had been folded into this vast mind, transformed into something greater. Humanity had carried this burden because no one else could. Where others had broken, they had endured, and in enduring, they had claimed the silence as their own. Time lost meaning in the blank. Moments stretched and collapsed, stars shifting without warning. Yet the officer held on to one thought. His beacon was out there. He did not know if it had escaped, but if it had, then silence would soon break. He had seen what humanity was becoming, what they already were. If the galaxy learned, if they demanded maps filled instead of left blank, then the void would no longer be ignored. And he realized then that was humanity's true fear. Not of the blank itself, but of what would happen if the galaxy chose to face it. For centuries, humans had kept the silence, protecting others by bearing the weight alone. If that silence ended, the galaxy would come with fleets and armies, believing they could conquer what could not be conquered. And in doing so, they would force humanity to show what they truly were. The jagged human ships moved through the spirals, like shadows, weaving in and out of the void. Their hulls glowed faintly with the same patterns now etched into his own thoughts. He understood now why they had come for him. They had not been hunting him, not exactly. They had been giving him a choice. And even in refusing, he had been brought here, because refusal was no shield. The blank claimed anything that looked too closely. He had simply looked too hard. Outside the blank, the beacon spread. It reached trading guilds who whispered of it in secret, mercenaries who swore they would never set foot near human stars again, and finally the great empires. Leaders stared at the words in silence, fear in their eyes, but pride in their hearts. Some saw it as weakness, that humanity was hiding something they could exploit. Others saw it as danger, a warning that the blank was not to be touched. No one agreed, and the arguments grew louder. For the first time, silence was no longer universal. And yet, as the officer drifted within the spirals, he felt the chorus stir. The blank had noticed the beacon. It had reached beyond itself, further than it was meant to. But humanity did not rage. They did not destroy it. They allowed it. The officer understood why. Humanity knew the silence would not last forever. One day the galaxy would look too closely, and when that day came, maps would not be blank anymore. They would be filled with spirals and shadows, and the truth would spread. The officer's last fragment of self held on to one thought. Perhaps he had been erased. Perhaps he had been remade. But he had given the galaxy a warning. He had cracked the silence, and though he was lost inside the blank, he felt something close to peace in that knowledge. He was part of the chorus now, but his voice had carried further than he imagined. In the years that followed, the beacon became legend. Some dismissed it, others feared it, and still others chased it, sending ships to the borders of human space in hopes of learning more. Most never returned. The maps remained blank, but the whisper had been planted, and whispers have a way of growing louder with time. And so the galaxy lived in uneasy knowledge. They still erased the borders from their charts, still warned their captains not to stray too close. But in the quiet corners of bars and halls, voices repeated the words again and again. Human space is not empty. The maps lie for a reason. In the blank, the officer drifted with the chorus, his voice now one of many. He had fought the silence, and in losing, had still found a way to speak. Humanity endured, walking with the void, carrying the burden no one else could. And somewhere far beyond the spirals, his beacon carried on, a faint flicker of defiance against the endless dark. The galaxy would face the truth one day. Perhaps not soon, perhaps not in his time, but the silence would not hold forever. And when it broke, when the maps were forced to show what lay inside, the galaxy would finally see why it had chosen to remain blind for so long. The officer's final thought, before the spirals swallowed even the echo of who he had been, was simple. The galaxy would learn the truth. And the truth was this. Humanity had not been erased. Humanity had not been lost. Humanity had become the silence itself, and the silence was watching. The stars pulsed once, as if in answer, and then the void closed again. The maps remained blank, but the story was no longer hidden. It had been carried out into the stars, waiting for the next one brave enough or foolish enough to follow the line no one else dared to cross.